Ken Lynch, welcome to the Strive 365 podcast. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me. It's haven't seen each other in a while, so yeah, I'm looking forward to having a chat,
Yeah,
seeing what you're up to and how it's all working.
it's been good. We had a quick chat off camera and yeah, picked up like old colleagues as we haven't seen each other for 5.5 years. So hey, I'm really keen to have or have been keen to have you on. I'm keen to have this conversation because on this newest journey of mine, I've been talking about this pre-performance space, this HPAD space, and the reality is people probably haven't heard that language before unless you're operating in that and maybe in New Zealand circles, not even Australia circles. So, Ken, for those who don't know you, you were the HPAD national manager at High Performance Sport New Zealand when I was there at New Zealand Football. And we had a strong connection as part of my role as HPAD lead at New Zealand Football. So I wanted to get you on to clarify some myths, to provide us some clear definition around what, in your opinion, HPAD is and maybe why it's important for us to be talking about it.
Yeah, yeah. Look, it's a really interesting space. There's a lot of people curious about it. The title probably doesn't do it justice, and yeah, there's lots of different names on it, but yeah, I think it's pertinent to many people in sport, from you know athletes and parents right through to coaches and even administrators. So it's still a fairly fresh space, but it's definitely wide, lots of breadth and scope to it.
So, how would you describe it in a sentence?
Yeah, so HPAD, firstly, we refer to as that's high performance athlete development. Um, and generally, it would be what we've identified with evidence is the length of time that it takes for someone to receive quality coaching and support in a high performance system to achieve at a pinnacle event, which could be Olympic, Paralympic Games, could be a World Cup, could be, making a national team, whatever those pinnacle pieces are. It's different from what people maybe refer to as the pathway, and we hear a lot of rhetoric around pathways they shouldn't be in play, and maybe they shouldn't be earlier. From a high performance system perspective, though, I think it's important that if we're going to do well by athletes and coaches and programs, that we get clear on what they need to be doing when and how to do it. So it's way more than a sentence, but yeah, I think it's a reasonable capture.
That's great. So you've spoken about athletes, so identified performing athletes already, spoke about coaches in that space, systems as well, so people who operate in that space. I guess the question would be how far away from those pinnacle events, the Senior World Cup, the Olympic Games, are we talking, if you could put a timestamp on that?
Yeah, I think it's generally been referred to as kind of the T minus 8 years away as a real general, which would suggest in an Olympic Paralympic concept or a football World Cup concept that's two cycles, or from a some people call them quads, but it's sports specific. So uh, where a sport is generally more mature and there's a lot of depth, it's likely to take a bit longer. Where a sport is newer or there's a lack of depth, it may take less time. And in something like a Paralympic sport, there's the potential for it to take significantly less time on the back of it could be an acquired injury, and classifications change, which may open and close doors for people, but certainly in an opening sense, it would be less than one cycle for some people. So sport specific, system specific, and really sports should do the due diligence around how long that does take, and have the evidence. Uh, the other thing to consider is longevity in the sport too. So something like eventing or shooting, you may be able to stay in the game longer just because of the nature of the sport, and something that's higher impact, more physically demanding on the human, you may be involved for less time just on just the length of career type stuff.
That's great. So hopefully people listening in are well and truly in that kind of intersect of potentially 1 to 2 cycles away from pinnacle event, athlete already on a track, we're trying to stay away from the word pathway, but on a track towards hopefully that still have a lot to learn and a lot to develop, and coaches also operating within both with those athletes, but also on that track themselves. So you are the man, you are the guru that I know at least to speak with this in great depth. So I guess first question around looking at individual sports as well as team sports, we'll get into a little bit more around the systems you would have put in place, but is there any major differences that you can feel between the two kind of team and individual codes when talking about this space? Or are they, again, is it more code specific based on the needs of that individual code?
I think there is code specificity, but there's a lot of commonalities across codes types of sports. The main difference probably between team and some of the individual sports would potentially be the type of assessment and understanding is generally more qualitative or subjective. So criteria for entry in a team sport, while there's a level of evidence that can be presented from an analysis perspective, there's a reasonable amount of coach system expertise that supports decision making, and individual sports that are more closed skill, centimeters, grams, seconds, or CGS sports can be more objective, quantitative in their assessment of where people are at, and so it might be an easier prospect. So that there's pros and cons in both, but that would not suggesting all individual sports are objectively measured, quantitatively measured to that degree, but it would be most would be closer to that end than a team sport, and then that contributes to the environment, right? So team environment versus individual sport, yeah, competing for places, you may be able to play in more than one position, which might change the dynamic of how you manage in that environment versus another sport where that may not be an option. So I think the nature of the sports changes the environment a little bit. That would be another difference that I would have noticed.
For those listening, they'll be able to pick up your accent, which you haven't lost for these many years. So if we just sort of walk through a little bit of your timeline, probably, maybe not the initial starting point for you in this space, but certainly one of the first bigger roles was working with the Irish Triathlon Association. You went to the Olympics as the national team manager as well as head of talent development. So just walk me through maybe what that role was, a younger version of yourself. What would you have, potentially done different through those set of experiences? And, how does maybe triathlon fit into the, comparing to football or other codes?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to move back to Ireland from New Zealand. So I had a role with the Irish Institute of Sport, and as part of that, got seconded into triathlon for the London Games, which was a fantastic opportunity and a great insight into the detail required, and yeah, really enjoyed the experience. The wider role in Ireland, I suppose, the Irish Institute of Sport was new. I think I was one of the first employees of it. We were in a building that was about to be demolished, I think, and they were building a new one, and there's only about 5 of us. So we wore a lot of hats, and so it was interesting to be in a fledgling national system versus more established ones that I've been involved in since. Probably my much younger self really enjoyed probably that freedom and reasonable amount of ambiguity or lack of certainty around the work because it was new. My older self likes to put things in neat boxes and much more systematic about things, but yeah, it was great time in our sport. Some really good people around. Learned a lot very quickly, and uh, learned from some really good people about how to approach things systematically and with the detail required, like I mentioned right at the beginning.
Then you find yourself back in New Zealand. And for me, I thank goodness that you got yourself back to New Zealand and we crossed paths, because you've shaped a lot of my thinking, my approach, my processes around this whole space. So you come back in High Performance Sport New Zealand as the HPAD National Manager, where again, kind of what we just alluded to, working with codes. They had to be targeted codes. So through our sporting carding system, which for me at New Zealand Football was exclusive to the women's pathway, not the men's side. So working with codes and therefore coaches and players inside those codes they get 1 to 2 cycles away from pinnacle events. So yeah, you spent 8 years there. Maybe just fill me in or fill the audience in a little bit around what that role further encompassed, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, it was great experience getting back to New Zealand and into that role. The There had been people in that role previously, so it wasn't new. What I'd stepped into in Ireland. So it had already formed, and I think that thinking had already formed around current cycle, next cycle, and this role was predominantly based around next cycle. And the focus of the work around the amount of sports to work with and what we were trying to achieve was really clear. And the group that you were part of, which is great to have you part of, the formation of that and high performance athlete development leaders in sports, embedded in the sport versus employed by central agency like High Performance Sport New Zealand and then farmed out or deployed was I think a longer burn, but much more enduring. And so to have those roles in sport, waking up every day thinking about HPAD in that sport was I think a healthy strategy. And the group that was involved, to be involved in building that and forming the type of connectivity that you experienced was yeah, I wouldn't swap it for anything. I thought it was a good piece of work. 8 years, reasonable amount of time. And great to see in the end HPAD form such a big part of the new strategy.
Yeah, so there were myself in football, we would have had, my equivalent in rugby and netball and union and basketball, all those kind of key sports. And, we'd get together every 6 months. One sport would host and be the host for that venue. We, fortunate enough to go to Cycling New Zealand hosted, and we had a trip around the velodrome and we'd spend time collaborating with other like-minded people around our current systems and processes and sport and challenges, and have people like yourself kind of more just shaping our conversation and providing us a little bit of more up-to-date research in certain areas or the new way of thinking, and maybe here's some ideas to go and test and bring them back. We also had we went to frisbee golf one time, and we're fortunate to sort of circulate around down in Wellington and rugby. New Zealand Rugby were based there, so a lot of really good exposure to like-minded people and like-minded thinking. One of the key messages I remember very, very clearly, outside of those environments, I'd catch up with you maybe once a month or a similar staff member just to look internally specific for my space and our code. But remember you saying to me, it was actually over a beer very early on, saying, keep the base as wide as possible, as long as possible, and whatever else you do, you won't go too far wrong. So that's something that I have tried to apply a lot in the space that I operate in now, and I see that as something that not everybody does. Everyone's in a race to close the base, to get to the top quickly, and we miss important steps as program designers, where we're just doing the athletes a disservice because they might get to the top and not have an important part of that puzzle. So yeah, I'm not too sure if you see any other things that people gloss over or need to just go a little bit slower in making sure they get correct at the first time of asking.
Yeah. What wider for longer is I've made that more concise maybe. Perhaps it was the beer. It's a longer sentence then, but yeah, there's we've got to be mindful of exactly what you said, and not doing athletes and earlier in the pathway young players or participants a disservice. So we could focus a lot on the how of coaching to retain more people in the sport, but forget the what. And I think actually learning how to coach the what really well is a good way to retain people and ensure that they've got the things, whether, from a holistic perspective, not just from a sport specific perspective, the tools required when they get into a position later on. The resource will only allow you to keep it so wide for so long, and clarity and increased time and connection with those people should enable you to make better quality, more accurate decisions on who the people are when you do start to narrow the funnel. And so it should be a win-win for the people, participants. If you're clearer, we can articulate things better. Yeah, resources not is finite, and so people do have to close things down a little bit earlier. But yeah, by doing that, I think we can have a lot more cake and a lot less icing as well. I think if once you narrow it too early, people are looking for the supposed 1%ers with people that are still in the gross learning stage that really need strong fundamentals to be able to take the icing on and hold it later on. So I think that would be part of my thinking would go to, yeah.
If you remove the sport specific, the code specific skills and technical elements required for that sport, because they're going to be unique to that sport, is there similarities around the other stuff, the other fundamentals of athletes in the space, that you've seen transition successfully into the HP space, the high performance space, that you can share?
I think there's a lot of commonalities cross code around being ready and what is readiness. And so some of this sits with the sport and getting clear on that, and then being able to communicate that and create a regression model, which in that sense, I'm absolutely not ashamed or afraid of using the word high performance pathway. When the work's been done to identify an evidence-based regression that brings us to a point of where performance is starting to become more important. I think one of the things that we use, and I'm working on Australian sailing now for those lower down, is are they curious learners? And I think that's something that's common across people that are successful. And I know you will have been exposed to some work in New Zealand around behaviours with Richard Young's work at the time, and that knowledge edge team around medalists versus non-medalists. Well, lower down in the pathway or pre the pathway, people that ask good questions and can apply the learning, and learn again from that applied learning and reflect, are more likely, I think, to be successful. And we need to try and foster that. And before I would have asked for learners, but I realised in time that people have to learn how to learn maybe before we assess whether they can learn, and they may not have had that opportunity. So I think that's a big learners, but not selecting people that are curious and cultivating curiosity and providing the right stimulus for us to be able to see that and for them to be able to grow is across sport is really, really important.
So we're talking maybe now about people in charge of their sports pathway, for want of a better word. What are some of the key things that, are front of mind in HPAD management around, talent ID or entry exit points or biases that, the maybe the top two or three things that, again, trying to get these things right more often than not are going to, certainly keep you towards the right course, as opposed to, doing them a huge disservice.
Yeah, the clarity and the evidence behind that is really important to lay a platform for good practice development that you can be confident in aligning to. So, if your finger's in the air and you're not really sure where people need to get to, what are they aiming at, and how do you do a gap analysis and help them understand where they are and where they need to be in what time? So I think from a system perspective, a lot of systems previously were built from the bottom up. We just need to get people to be better. Well, we've got a much better handle on now. In all systems and in all sports, we've got access to more data than we've ever had before, more intelligence, more research being done. So to be clearer on where the line is, what it looks like, and then to work back from that to give people confidence in north is still north, and these are the things that we're really clear that you're going to need to work on. I think that's a very valuable tool in not doing people a disservice, in being able to be clear. The worst thing possible is we draw a line and someone's above it and someone's below it, and we can't articulate why. Try and have a conversation with an athlete and their parents when you're not clear. It's challenging.
If I ask you to do a gap analysis, then what you need to go away and come back and report back to me in, I don't know, say a month's time. Like, how are you going through that process? Because I think it's a really important thing to be a little bit more clear and dig a little bit deeper on, because people listen and go, okay, well, how do I start that? Because I know you're right. You fundamentally, that everything will come out of that drives your plan, that drives the action steps and reflection, and where do I need to go get support from. But maybe just explain where you can around what your starting point for that would be, and some of the key things, the key questions to ask.
Yeah, I think if we go with a simple analogy with one of that centimeter, gram, second sports where something is timed, we know what the current world record is. Let's say we have an understanding that over the last, let's say, 5 cycles, that record reduces over time by an average of 0.3%. So in 5 years' time, in 4 years' time or 8 years' time, let's keep working in cycles. In 8 years' time, that record is going to be lower than it is now. And if that's world's best, we can't be aiming at world's best now. We need to be, if we're in the HPAD space, we're aiming at world's best for 8 years' time, a projected target. So how do we put ourselves in a position to be that quick? Understanding where I am now, how far am I away? X amount of time. Well, what do we know the profile technically, tactically, if there's a tactic involved, physically, mentally, and environmentally? What do we know contributes to being able to deliver that time? And then where am I in relation to that? From a sport-specific perspective, the technical, tactical knowledge, and definitely the physical, but there'll be a lot of commonalities in mental, but some differences in some sports. To be able to work back from that to build, because some things you can logically sequence. There's no point in lifting more weight or providing. No point in lifting more weight if technically you're not proficient, because it's likely to end up in injury. So we know that's a logical sequence. 1A goes before B, and other things we can do at whatever stage along the pathways. But some of the fundamentals you need to crack on with early, like good quality planning and understanding of why. So it's a building back process from what we understand what good will look like, when we're likely to be competing at that level against those people that can do that and deliver that time.
If we're thinking about coaching or leading a program that manages this space, we're helping prepare people for the future, maybe to pass them on to a different part of the system or a different part of the pathway, if you wish. What about things such as player monitoring, selection, ID, deselection? Does it happen once a year? Is it better practice to do this every 3 months? Where do you see that kind of entry exit point conversation best being served?
Yeah, from an effectiveness perspective, it should be live so people can come in and out whenever. From a management perspective, the easiest thing to do is do it once a year. And somewhere in the middle is probably where most people land. I know, like you mentioned, the carding system, which has changed to a different model in New Zealand now, but where athletes are categorized at a level generally happens in systems once a year. More internal systems that don't, internal sports systems can happen more frequently. But if you're doing it every week, you really need to give the people in that you've selected in the time, especially when they're younger, to grow into that space and not sort of be knee-jerk around it. So I think from a management, ease of management perspective, and from a giving people time and have patience perspective when people are younger, the year probably works. And when they step into that area, so on entry, it needs to be really clear what got them there. And it needs to be really clear around what the program's expectations is of them and what they should have expect of the program. So each can hold each other to account. And then at any point around exit or transition, so transition should be supported effectively in the lead in and tested on when they have had time in that space to understand if it went well so the program can learn. Any exit should also be as good an experience as possible. So they leave with clarity on why they're no longer involved, with work-ons and an opportunity to re-enter. So here's the things you need to work on. If you get to this level, then at this date, this is when we'll be reviewing who's involved and how they're involved and who's included and not. And so I think if we had that in mind, then we'll be going pretty well. What enables that the whole way through is effective monitoring, like you mentioned, right? If it's a surprise when you're out, it's a problem. It should never be a surprise.
Yeah, I think the entry in we focus on getting right, and it's an easy one, right? Because people are happy most of the time to be part of your system. I think the exit is the harder one and potentially more important through my experiences now. It's critical to get that right. And you spoke about some things there I think we really want to just double down on and go, here's why you're not in. Here's a chance to come back in. So the door's never closed. But we want to see these things to go away and hopefully improve upon. And we'll keep looking. I think too often in that we might say that, but do we actually mean that? And often athletes will leave and go, I'm not coming back because they've had a negative experience at that moment. And I've been, across, I've had national youth teams and age group teams and not selected players at under 20s level who've gone on and played senior football for the football ferns. So, but I've equally had players that we didn't select that have just removed themselves from the sport. So an element of it is on us as the coach or the program. An element of it is on the player. So getting that right is a really important one. Any thoughts around athletes maybe if they get, quote unquote released at that point in time, how they can go away and, if they want to get back in, the things that you've seen athletes successfully do?
Yeah, I think asking the question is really important if you haven't been offered the answer. So how do I get back in? Ideally they know why they're out and So the question, what do I need to work on? How do I get back in? And if there's an observation piece that's required in the meantime, just clarifying that. So when are you going to observe me? So programs like you said, and well-intentioned we'll keep an eye on you. We should never false promise, and most people involved in sport are givers and well-intentioned. So it's likely they're suggesting something they think they can do, but you got to know you have to actually build in the capacity to do it if you say you're going to do that. And so I think those questions on the way out, if they haven't been offered to you already, but early on, there's a lot going on physically, mentally, environmentally, just from a holistic perspective, where the stressors are coming from and what impact they have, school, parents, relationships, all of those things. At that age, especially if we've got quite a few, we often don't have time to drill down and understand that. And so I think being mindful that in a year's time, there could be a very different person in front of us. They could be a foot taller. They could have filled out. They could have reduced the stresses or learn to manage them ideally, and be presenting completely differently. And yeah, we could not go back and have a look and miss that. And again, do them and us, because if they end up going to play for us in football or end up representing the country at Olympic Games or Paralympic Games or whatever, Commonwealth Games, whatever the pinnacle event is, we could be doing our program a disservice. So I think there's a patience element to HPAD that I know you're very aware of, that we need to. I find that it's important to continuously reinforce that with stakeholders around it's going to take time. And in that, we understand it's non-linear. We understand there's going to be peaks and troughs. And so our programs need to be set up to understand and account for that. But there is an urgency. So, time's not infinite, and we can't have someone in a program for 8 years thinking that their next cycle for those 8 years. So yeah, it's getting that balance right. It's getting the balance right, and generally clarity on what good looks like and the comms around that are effective tools in helping to manage it.
We also don't want people blocking the future opportunities or experiences of people behind them in the timeline, right? So from a team sport, think about academy, I'm a goalkeeper, but I've got someone exhibiting high performance markers or future high performance markers behind me. I'm kind of taking their opportunities away from them. So lots to think about. And one of the things we may not always get right is due to our own personal biases on certain athletes or certain coaches within the system. How do you see that playing out regularly? Is there things that we can be more conscious of and aware that, you've seen that coaches and pathway managers have as a bias that we, by being aware of it, might allow us to think a little bit different?
Yeah, everybody's got bias, right? It's how much it comes out to play and how you wrap process around it to minimize it. And your version of what good looks like will be quite different to mine. We might be on the same track for most of it, but we'll separate at some points. And you'll observe people doing the things that you value and doing things that you don't value that might cut across some differences that I've got. But I think the best way to negate, I don't think you'll ever negate it, but minimize it, is to wrap good process around it. So I know cricket in England have used the term many eyes many times, and I'd love to have had that one for myself, but I have to give credit where it's due. And I think that's a good mentality to have around are you seeing what I'm seeing? Um, and then I think with the many times, even for an individual assessing, is and I think you'll have been there when we talked about this, is what are you seeing? What do you need to see? What did you not see? How do you test it? And we often look for confirmation in a competition environment, and that may not be the best place to look for it. So I think observation in different environments is a helpful tool as well. Understanding that there may be a difference in the weighting. You may, depending on the stage of the high performance pathway, there may be a heavier weighting on competition. Earlier on, maybe less so.
Now, speaking as an HPAD leader, you've worked with coaches, you work with sports, you've also worked with athletes in your time as well. They're the three kind of main, and also parents. They're the main 3 or 4 key audience, I believe, listening to this. So if I just now kind of narrow our focus a little bit, we're getting close to the top of that pyramid and speaking specifically to athletes now. What is probably 1 or 2 pieces of key advice that you would like to give them who are in the space or close to getting into the space that they need to be aware of?
It takes time. There are no shortcuts. And you're going to be operating as an exceptional person surrounded by exceptional people. So I've experienced a lot of times when you play out the system view around the evidence that suggests X amount of medalists have followed this track, and this is where you need to be by when. There's always an outlier, and we design systems for the many, but we need flexibility around the few. And so there will be some exceptions, and a lot of times people point to the exceptions as the rule. When we set systems up, we set them up for the many, but when you present that view, a lot of the people in the room think they're the exception. So I think the clarity on where you really are, where I think drilling down on that is the core to understanding how to accurately close a gap.
So that's them finding out. Now they often will need support in finding that out. So that could be their coach, it could be their club, it could be their NSO, the National Sport Organization, it could be a raft of different people. So what are the key questions? You spoke about maybe questions to ask when maybe released from a program, but what about in the program, in the system? What are the things they should be asking to help gain that clarity?
Yeah, I think those people that you mentioned, it's really important to triangulate. So you could shop around and find someone that tells you something that you want to hear. You're exceptional when that's not going to help you. So using a number of people to get an accurate picture is really helpful, and surrounding yourself with people that are prepared to be honest. So that's a really good start. What suggests to you I am where I am? So what have you observed that leads you to the conclusion I am here instead of here? What would you view as what I need to do next to progress? And who do you think can help me with that? Pretty simple, but good questions around identifying really where you're at, really how big the gap is, what the logical next steps are, and then where you're going to get the support to be able to close the gap. I think that's a really good start. in the absence of a pathway that's well communicated and does that for you, I think that would be a good place to go.
Yeah, two things there. I'm seeing between the lines are being curious, so taking responsibility and being having the ownership of it's my pathway, for want of a different word, and how am I going to tap into those around me to help me succeed through that journey. What about any red flags or pitfalls that you've seen through experience that, athletes, if they knew more about, could avoid, to help them kind of transition, along that journey?
Yeah, I think there's always people around that will tell you there's shortcuts and that they're the person that can show you where it is, the secret passage from the conservatory to the library. um, Especially in a private contracting world where you're going to pay for that. So I think it's important to be mindful uh, of people's intentions, maybe. So what's their intentions for you, and what are they paying attention to? Often people are trying to replicate what happens higher up to demonstrate uh, that they're capable of coaching people at that level when that's not what the people at that level require. So I would be mindful of that. I won't say red flag, danger, danger, but I would say it's worth asking some intelligent questions around to understand what the motivation is and why it's a shortcut. Because it doesn't appear to be, if this was so good, everybody would be doing it. Actually, the curious learners and the diligent people have a really quality plan and they're just working really hard.
Yeah, why is it a perceived shortcut? Might be a better way to think about it. Now, I
Yeah,
know shortcuts and things take time and at different speeds, right? So you and I might be at the same point at this point in time, and you might get there quicker than I get there. Well, I may never get there, you may get there, or we both get there, but there's a difference in speed. So taking all of that with a grain of salt, is there any obvious quick wins? And I use that word a little bit tongue in cheek because we know there's not, but is
yeah.
anything simple and now that athletes listening can kind of go, I need to add that you might suggest go and add this into your week. Go and do more of this. What are the quicker things that that 1% thing, which is not the key, the 98%, the bigger rocks are the key, but is there anything obvious that you can share that might be, if people aren't already doing that, they should be trying to build into their plan?
Uh, we've already probably touched on it in a few different areas, but effective planning is for me really, really, really valuable because if you plan really well and you've got the rigor around it, you can be confident in the direction that you're going and confident in the work that you're doing to get there versus meandering around and not being deliberate. So if you do the work up front early and lay a really good platform and it's triangulated, so it's well founded, you can be confident that the work that you're doing is contributing to your progression and development. And I don't talk about accelerating anything. I talk about optimizing it because I don't think we can't go faster than we can go, but we can go as fast as we can go. And quality planning enables that. There's enough upsets in the world that you can't control that'll knock you off course anyway. Injury, like we talked about, stressors. There's things that we know are going to happen because we've learned, and planning can account for that. There's things we know are going to happen, but we don't know when. I don't know anyone that's got to the top without getting injured, but I bet they couldn't predict when it was going to happen. But so we can have the skills and the strategies to understand and overcome that. And then there's things that will happen that we don't know when. We don't know what they are and we don't know when they're going to happen. So again, having strategies to manage and cope with adversity, as an example, building that into your development is a wise way to go. So, but the clarity up front to understand where north is, knowing that every day you go out there, every session you're doing, you're going in the right direction or pretty close to it, is invaluable.
North is, it's a common plan to get to North, and a big part of that is coaches. So if for coaches listening in now operating in this HPAD space, there's already a level of competency for those people. So hopefully none of this is foreign to them. But through your years of experience at working with coaches of different sports, team sports, individual sports, what are some of the two or three bigger things? We've already touched on probably most of them, but just to highlight again, that your role needs to be getting right more often than not to give your athlete the best chance of this successful transition.
I think being creative and clever to generate the variety in the environment to keep people interested and motivated, but based around the fundamentals is really important. I think it's key. We could roll out a lot of the fundamentals, keep doing the same thing, gets boring, people don't want to do it, start moving away from it, start looking for shiny things, get attracted to replicating the space above us. But I think the real beauty of a high performance development coach is being able to keep that space and that environment vibrant. So people want to come to training and people enjoy the work and understand how it's adding value to their progression and development. I think that's a cornerstone of coaching at high performance athlete development level. It's part of the specificity. Part of the beauty is being able to do that.
Do you think it's changed over time? Like has sport as a general moved in the last 25 years from your experience, where that is now a new thing, or has it always been likely to have been the case?
I think the replication of things that were going on in the space above have always been the go-to because even if they're boring, they're attractive because they're doing it. And so it's motivating enough. And previously maybe people were tolerant of that and tolerant of the repetitive nature of maybe elements of training or work. But I think there's less tolerance now. I think there's more demands on the coaches from the people in front of them around rationalizing why they're doing certain things and checking and challenging around why we can't do it a different way. But also I think less tolerant of repetitiveness. And maybe that's just the world that we're living in around it's faster paced. Videos are 10 seconds long. The general media that level of age of athlete, let's say, is exposed to is quite different to what it was, like you said, 25 years ago. It's different. It's a different kettle of fish. So I think we need to move with that. We can't coach like we used to get coached. And often that we were coached like we used to get coached because the person that was coaching us was coaching the way they used to get coached, and they were 2 generations behind. The speed of the change in the audience in front of us is much faster than the speed of generational progress in coaching. So we've got to, as coaches, also be curious learners. How do we do this better? How's this landing? Is my work having an impact? How do I know? How am I testing it? Retention may not be enough because we might be doing a lot of the how, but not enough of the what. Like we talked about right at the beginning. It's it's a fine balance. But I think the best coaches in this space spend time thinking about it.
What about if you're talking to coaches who could still be in the space, but they are also on their journey, hopefully forward and up and into the HP land, not just with players in the space, but also striving to move up the levels themselves. Like you spoke about being curious learner, bringing vibrancy to your environments. What I guess what support is out there for people. I've spoken in previous episodes about feeling like I was stuck like a man on an island, and I had a few people I could turn to. And in terms of either systems out there or general advice to coaches who are moving through this pathway themselves, what would you offer through your experiences?
I think there's great richness in the people in front of you. That form of feedback is live, and helpful, and something that you shouldn't be afraid of. And the more regularly you do it, likely the less anxiety you have around it, which I think is very useful. What's available for them, and how they can develop themselves. It's similar to the athlete plan. Where are you now? Where do you want to go? But mindful of I want that position, or I want that role, I want that job that may be higher up. But you've got a job now. So how do you do the job that you're doing now well, and in that demonstrate that you're capable of doing the job that's above you? And so in my mind, when we're working with coaches here, 70% of what you're focused on in your own development is on doing the job that you're doing now better. And 30% is aspirational, and how can you weave those bits into the job that you do now without succumbing to the temptation of replicating the space higher up? And then how do you manufacture the opportunities to be able to do that if you haven't got a mechanism within your sport to do it?
Mm.
And you and I both know doors are more open than closed if you're prepared to knock on them, or if you're prepared to ask the question, is there any chance I could pop into your environment for 2 days? Rarely, and it's generally down to timing, people say no.
Yeah.
So I think there's more opportunity out there than people imagine.
Yeah, or can I buy a coffee and pick your
Oh.
brains on topic? Yeah, my coffee is an oat latte, so they're a little bit expensive these days, but I'm more than happy to give up 45 minutes to chew the fat. And I when I do that, I always learn back from the person. Maybe they're asking me questions that I hadn't thought through deep enough, and have kind of mumbled through an answer, and I kind of go, I need to be a bit clearer in that
Yeah,
space. Well, what about
it's good.
being proactive? You speak about that, having conversations or going into an environment, or building out a plan. Is any other tips about being proactive and trying to close that gap after I've done my analysis of where I want to get to?
There's a lot out there, right? There's a lot more out there than there used to be in terms of books and podcasts and um, general information. I think it's useful to get some flow to your learning, and like I keep a learning log, and that could be a summary of a research paper, or that could be after we've had this conversation, like you just mentioned. I didn't articulate that very well. Am I not clear enough, or am I just mumbling through my words? Well, so there might be two or three things out of this that I'll drop into that learning log. Why did I make a decision? What was the context behind it? What informed it? What do I think the impact's going to be? And then revisit that later. And so these are things that are free. You can do yourself, but I think a flow into your learning around, there's times to open, and then there's times to narrow. Uh, and so I revisit that log, and I go through, and whatever, after say a period of time, 3 4 months, maybe 6 months, depending on how busy things are, what are the key learnings from that I can apply to my practice? And I like that question in working with coaches, in removing it away from conceptual, and to go, what have you learned that you can trial, and apply, and then review. And is it going to, how do you think it's going to change your practice? And how much time is it going to take? I think they're really valuable strands to pull out and enhance thinking and practice. Like I enjoy that work with coaches, and I enjoy doing it myself. Um, Finding the time is often difficult, but actually it's part of the discipline, isn't it? If you want to get better.
It's that reflection piece, as an athlete reflecting, as a coach reflecting, how often do we do that? I remember, I think probably from conversations years ago with you, we spoke about hot wash, cold wash sort of review. So straight after the session, you're going to have a quick cold wash. You come in out of the garden, wash your hands quickly. It's a 5 minute debrief while things are fresh, and then maybe a day later or post the tour, you're going to have a much more longer time in the shower, that hot wash to get the real nuts and bolts of the learning from what's taken place. So I think we can too quickly rush away from an environment and not build in to almost that time of that 10 minutes post session where all the staff are together and let's get some learnings, and what do we need to add into the plan for the next session or the next cycle, whilst it's fresh.
Yeah, and on inviting people, trying to open doors for yourself for your learning. I learned this from some work with New Zealand Rugby. Is anytime someone wants to come into our environment and observe something, really, it's no problem. No problem. Let's just find a time. But there's only one rule, and it's on the way out. What did you see, hear, and feel? So it's not onerous. If some people like to take a bit of time and say, I'll email you next week. If you don't email me, you don't tell me, you don't come back. So, it's simple things like that are really informative. That sharp, hey, what do you think, real quick, is helpful. I think just to be mindful too of over debriefing. And I've witnessed that in some sports where it's too long. And the question at the end of it is, in 3 months' time, how much of that are you or are they going to remember? And so, yeah, just be mindful of that kind of that trap.
The third and final piece I want to dig a little bit into is around being a parent of a HPAD athlete, and there's going to be a lot of support needed. Certainly a lot of support to have already applied to get your son or daughter to this point. But what, through your experience, is there any key similarities, things that, again, a bit like asking the question of the coaches, what are some things that they can be doing regularly, or maybe not doing regularly, that's going to help with this transition?
Yeah, understanding it is really important. And some sports are better than others at communicating it, and some sports are better than others at including the parents. And just before we get to the parent perspective, from the sport perspective, not being afraid to bring the parents into the tent earlier on so that they do understand and they can be better contributors to supporting their child's progression. But yeah, listening is really important to that. What are you hearing? And listening to understand, not listening to fire a shot. And challenge is perfectly acceptable, but I think just make sure it's well founded. But listen, learn, be an enabler. Be conscious of your actions, and am I enabling here or am I blocking? Challenge them to be better, but support. Often we hear the challenge, but don't see the support. And then communicate. So communicating, fostering communication with their child to and fro, communicating with the sport to generate the understanding when it's appropriate, and paying attention to the communication. I think there's a lot of times where some of the comms that does come from sport, that's well intentioned and probably reasonable practice, gets overlooked and not read maybe, and then questions come on the back of not understanding. So if you're really invested, I think you have to invest in that part of it too, not just the facade of the event, the competition, the game day.
So I'm now brought into the tent by the sport, which is a great start. When you spoke about asking sort of the questions, what sort of questions, if I don't know already, should I be, confident enough to ask? And we've spoken in the past to some guests, who've mentioned, if you haven't grown up with that sport, or you don't know the nuances of that code, maybe avoid trying to talk about those specifics in that sport. Let the coaches and the sport provide that. But as a sporting parent, what sort of things should I be aware of? What questions should I be asking if I'm not getting that information provided already?
Yeah, like a great question is how can I help? And you would hope that the sport's in a position to be able to answer that. Like that's a cracker. First up, and that may be, hey, you could help them with this type of practice, or be good if they were on time. uh, it could be the type of conversation that they have. You know, arming the parent with some good questions post training or competition to help the young athlete focus more on what's important, or maybe reduce focus on things that are less important, which I think they might get anxious about. Yeah, what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to achieve? And uh, I think it's okay to ask the why question, but be informed. Why are you why are you doing it that way? Why is this the sequence? And I think if it's a parent that knows enough about the sport to be dangerous, you can get sucked into asking questions that you don't really know the answer to yourself. So just check yourself around, hey, am I asking because I'm curious? Am I asking to show I know something? Or am I asking to help my young athlete progress? And it's not a bad checkpoint, is it?
Yeah, I love that. Also asking your son or daughter, how can I help? I think is a really
Uh,
awesome question to be asking anyway. I mean,
yeah.
hopefully that's happening naturally, but if you're not, then and maybe just listen to what they say and actually listen to what they say, not just ask it and then kind of, well, I've already got my preconceived answers behind that. But yeah, and maybe ask them periodically, like every 3 months, because it will change, right? What they need from you as mum or dad is potentially going to change, maybe more often than those 3 months. But
Yeah.
ask a
Yeah.
good question.
I saw a great video a while ago. I loved it, and I haven't been able to find it since. I don't know where I picked it up from, and I saved it onto a hard drive, and it's lost forever. But it was a cracking video of a coach that decided it was a good idea, and I think it was a good idea for it was a young football team. Maybe they were eight, nine, let's say, and the coach stopped this particular game and asked the parents of the kids to take the field and asked the kids to take the sideline and said to the kids, I want you to behave like your parents behave. And so what the kids were shouting at the parents are now experiencing how it felt to be on the field and getting this type of instruction or challenge or support. There's some really, really good parents out there, really well informed and really respectful of the expertise, especially in a high performance athlete development setting where I think there is real credibility in the coaching and in the staff around those programs. So yeah, we can't get lost in some of the other bits that don't go so well. There's definitely some good people out there.
Absolutely. Hey, Ken, we've covered a lot. I'm satisfied. I think you've given us a description of HPAD really well. We've spent a lot of time teasing out some of those things, which hopefully, maybe we've just given it a bit of a name and label to processes, parts of programs that are already happening naturally for the audience. So we'll finish with some quick fire questions in a repeat after me segment. So here we go. One question I would like to set the audience is,
One question that I would like to set the audience is, why do you do what you do?
one concept or idea that I've been thinking about lately is,
Oh, I've got to repeat that. That's right. One concept or idea that I've been thinking about is leaving space, not crowding learning.
a book, movie, or podcast I would recommend is,
A book, movie, or podcast I would recommend is Belonging by Owen Eastwood is fantastic. And Inside Running podcast keeps me sane because it's real.
not the first person to recommend Belonging, by the way.
I bet.
If I had a magic wand and I could change one thing about HPAD, it would be
If I had a magic wand and I could change one thing about HPAD, it would be people instantly have an understanding of good practice so that we could just talk about development and performance.
one piece of advice I was given that I would like to share is,
One piece of advice that I was given that I would like to share is don't panic.
the thing that I am striving for currently is,
The thing that I'm striving for currently is clarity. Clarity and a fast marathon. Not at the same time.
and to finish this off, my quote for the week is,
My quote for the week is based around someone I'm coaching that's running Boston Marathon, and enjoy it. It's sport.
and on that note, that is a fantastic way to end. Hey, Ken Lynch, been great catching up, mate. I love these sort of conversations around this particular HPAD space. One of the main drivers for having donating some of my time to create this podcast, which is definitely not in my comfort zone, but yeah, having people like yourself on and give up your time and share your wisdom, I know wholeheartedly is helping a lot of people. So hey, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And it doesn't look like you're outside your comfort zone. I think you're doing a great job. And it's great to hear something happening that's specific to this space, because it does kind of get lost a little bit. And I'm delighted that I know that you understand that, but delighted you've sort of acknowledged it by bringing this to fruition. It's going to be really helpful to a lot of people, I think.
Thanks so much for sticking through to the end of this episode. It would mean the world to us if you could hit the like or share button so we can get these amazing insights out to other like-minded coaches, athletes, and parents. Cheers.